Welcome to the Society for American Soccer History SASH Session with Matthew Evans, the author of US 94, the World Cup that changed the game. He's calling in from his native North Wales. Founded in 1993, SASH works to promote, facilitate, and disseminate research into the rich history and heritage of soccer in the United States. You can find us on the web at ussoccerhistory.org and on social media with our Facebook and Twitter accounts. If you'd like to join the society, please do so through the Join tab on our website. There's all sorts of other resources there, videos, and video of this will go up on our YouTube channel. There's some new features as well, as we've just been designated not-for-profit organization with our 501c3. So we're going to look to raise money to conduct some of our projects. But on to Matthew. Matthew is a freelance soccer writer who specializes in the history of the game. He has written extensively on all eras of the beautiful game for various online outlets. He appears on podcasts and in print, especially These Football Times, wonderful publication, a few of are behind me, and Nutmeg magazine. David Kilpatrick had a poem in Nutmeg in the last issue. He's a huge fan of soccer nostalgia. I have my New York, New Jersey, Stein right here, so I'm going to make sure he doesn't, get his fingers on that. He remains, massively into the 1994 World Cup because it's part of his education, having absorbed the tournament as a teenager. We all have those first tournaments that we were introduced to the game. So I promised some that I would show off my new shirt. Here it is, logos from the 1930 World Cup all the way to the last World Cup. But really excited to have Matthew here today to talk about a World Cup that is near and dear to the Society's hearts and minds. We were started in the year before the 1994 World Cup. So our Society's DNA is very much in that tournament. So over to you, Matt. He'll talk about his book project, and then we're going to open it up for question and answer session. So thanks for joining us today. And I have to, show off, the book before we pass it over to him. A beautiful cover, and we'll let you at it, Matt. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So like you touched on, I started writing as a hobby, just on the history of the game. There's so many interesting players, stories, teams that I think in this modern day now of wall-to-wall 24-hour football, some of these names and stories can be forgotten. So I started writing for websites and magazines, went from being a fan of the likes of These Football Times and Nutmeg to actually writing for them, which was, that was beyond my wildest dreams, really, when I first started off writing for, various websites. The dream was always to write a book, and obviously the subject matter is it's very, very important, if not the most important thing. So again, I just looked to the history of the game, my own sort of path as a football fan. So grew up in North Wales. My early days were spent on the Cop at Wrexham with my dad, watching games there, and by the time I got to my teenage years, I was sort of falling out of love with the game. I was playing other sports, not watching or playing as much football. And then the World Cup came around, and on these shores, it was a bit, there's no home nations. England aren't there. Obviously, Wales weren't there. So there was a lot of snobbery from these shores, from the media, where, there's a World Cup on, but it won't be any good because England aren't in it. But for me, I just seen it as an opportunity to enjoy the football and pick a team to follow throughout the tournament. And I picked the USA. I had the denim shirt with the stars. I had a nice denim drill top. And yeah, I picked them as my team. And that summer, those games, it just sort of reignited my love for the game. So when I came to write a book, I looked back at USA 94 and I thought, well, someone's bound to have wrote there's bound to have been a book on it. So when I'd done some early research, I found there was nothing sort of out there that I could see, certainly nothing that had been released in the UK. So I'd done some tentative research on the tournament, and just all these stories just started popping out. There's more to the World Cup than what was going on the pitch. There was the stories off the pitch, even before the World Cup started. The power struggle, with USSF, getting the bid accepted, then getting the tournament on, through to even I spoke to Professor Trey Rogers, who designed the grass to grow in the Silver Dome. Even stories like that. I sent chapters off to a couple of friends to like proofread, and that chapter on the grass, I messaged my friend. I said, I've got my latest chapter. Can you have a look at it? He said, oh yeah, what's it about? So I said, oh, it's about a guy who grew the grass in Pontiac Silverdome. And he was like, you're writing a chapter about grass? And I was like, honestly, it's really interesting. I think it's really interesting. So I sent him the chapter, and he got back to me and he was like, yeah, you were right. It's a really interesting story, and to see how it's sort of pitch technology and things like that, how that sort of changed over the years through, Sapporo, even through to like the Millennium Stadium here in Wales, or the Principality Stadium now, where, they closed the roof, through to like the Spurs Stadium, where they've got the interchangeable pitches and things like that. You've seen that as that was the birthplace of, the modern pitches you see today. So scratching the surface, you see all these other stories sort of come to the fore. And then it was a case of speaking to people that were involved in the tournament, whether that was from an organizational standpoint, from playing, from coaching. So this was like February 2020, I got the okay to start the book. And then obviously come March time, COVID, it really sort of kicked off, and there was lockdowns all over the place. So I was reaching out to people, former players and, etc. Oh, I'm writing this book. Would you be free for an interview? And people were just going, yeah, do you want to do it this afternoon? Because a lot of people were just sitting at home, with nothing to do. So for me, that those first sort of 2 months of writing and researching really sort of kicked the book into gear for me, because I got quite a lot of interviews done early doors, and I think that sort of gave me a boost, to just crack on with the book. And I was writing. I was finishing one chapter straight on to the next. I had all these people lined up to do interviews, because I said that COVID was great for me for the book. There was just people just sitting around waiting for something to do. So Jim Trecker reached out to me on Twitter. I got a private message. His Twitter account didn't have his name on it, so I got a private message saying, I can possibly help with your book. So I looked at the profile, and it only had like a handful of followers, and I thought, okay, I'll see where this takes me. So I just replied, yeah, okay, well, how can you help? So he's like, I'm Jim Trecker. I basically helped write the bid process and everything, and I can put you in touch with quite a few people. So from there, Jim put me in touch with Tom Meredith, who, again, really helpful. Spoke to Tom for well over an hour. He put me in touch with Alan Rothenberg and Hank Steinbrecher. And again, they put me in touch with other people, and it just sort of all really snowballed from there. And how it all started really from just getting this message on Twitter from a random profile that I didn't even follow. I didn't, they didn't even have the name on it. Within the space of 2 months, I think I'd spoke to, Alan Rothenberg, Hank Steinbrecher. I spoke to like three of the US players. So it really sort of snowballed from there. And I think when you're taking on a project like this, I think you need to have those early sort of wins, if you like, the little things that just gives you that boost that makes you think, this is going to be worthwhile pursuing, because obviously it takes over your life really for 2 years. It lived and breathed the tournament, and even now the book's out doing things like this and doing podcasts and things. You know, it sort of takes over, sort of, you know, takes over your life. But it's been a massive part of my life for the last sort of 2.5 years. And when I've done podcasts in the past, and you know, a lot of the people I've spoke to, some weren't born when the tournament started, some were only young, and a lot of them don't know about the tournament, and they're wanting to know, you know, more backstories and things like that. But obviously, speaking to you guys today, you know, for me, you know, you guys lived and breathed it. You know, this is great to actually be, you know, with people that hold the tournament, you know, really close to the hearts, like I do. You know, it's nice to be in amongst people that you know, love that World Cup and still, you know, think very fondly of it.
That's wonderful. You know, thanks for, you know, those reflections and on the process. Now, I think we're going to get into some of the nitty gritty, and maybe I'm going to ask the first question because I have the floor. But maybe what we can do is, as a preface to your question, maybe say your relationship to the tournament. You know, maybe, you know, where you were, what games, or whatever. So I was in New Jersey. We had tickets to every game at Giant Stadium. I think my mom got the short straw, and she had to come with me to a Saudi Arabia game. You know, but there was over 50,000 people there. I had friends who were working, you know, on the organizing committee at Giant Stadium. I was next to my father for the Ireland-Italy match. You know, was behind the goal, you know, that Ireland scored, and in the, you know, it was just a, you know, a wonderful experience. It was literally weeks before I got married, right? So I'm, you know, from there I'm able to date all the things in my life. 94 married, 98, you know, first child, 2002 second child, 2006 PhD, 10 a book, you know. So, you know, things for me come in these you know, 4-year increments. But amazing to finally have, you know, the World Cup in our country, and it was great. You know, completely followed, you know, the 90 World Cup, and 82 was probably the first one that I had followed, you know, kind of match by match. But one thing, and here's my question, that I've heard describing, you know, a team or a season, you know, one game flows into another game. If that's true, you know, could we then say one World Cup kind of flows into another World Cup? One of the things I think you do beautifully is, you know, describe 1990 Italy and then flow that into 1994 in the US. So could you talk about how you saw the relationship between 1990 and 1994 World Cups?
Well, 1990, I mean, 1986, I've got a few memories of. So I was born in 1980, so 1986, I've got a few memories of. 1990, I remember more of. Gazza's tears, Baggio's goal against Czechoslovakia, the awful final. But then for me, 94, it wasn't my first World Cup, but it was the World Cup where I truly like absorbed everything that was going on. It was cutting newspapers up. It was getting wall charts, sticker albums, cards. For me, it was football and Technicolor. You know, coming from Italia 90, in those 4 years, there've been big changes. You know, we'd had the stadium disasters. We'd had obviously the Champions League was starting up. We'd had the Premier League. Obviously, talking from, you know, being a football fan in Britain, you know, the Premier League had sort of kicked off, and you were sort of starting to see football was shifting. It was suddenly becoming a game for the family, a game that, you know, you could comfortably take your children to watch. You could go with your wife or your girlfriend. It's coming out of those, you know, the dark days, if you like, of the 80s, of the hooliganism, of the stadium disasters. it was football and technical for me. It was the beginning of what you see football as today. And that's why I thought the World Cup to change the game. Like a lot of people said to me, how did it change the game? It's like, well, to me, it kicked the doors open. USA 94 kicked the doors open on, football is a true global, global power. Like in the 80s, if people asked, oh, what do you do at the weekend? Oh, I go to football. Oh, well, you're a football hooligan. Do you go, fighting and things like, no. I just go and watch the football with friends or family. Whereas it sort of changed attitudes. It changed the way people looked at the sport, the way people looked at fans. And it also changed from like the organizational standpoint, like to FIFA, it changed how they knew a tournament could be put on, how a tournament could be produced, and how a tournament could make money. It was the beginning of, football as the true global power that it is today.
Thank you. Yeah, I love that transition that you make from, those dark days, certainly in club and national teams, from 90, through to 94. So I'm gonna open up the floor here. You can either use the chat room, physically raise your hand and wave at me, or put that yellow little waving hand, and between Zach and I, we can monitor this room. George, from California.
Yes, and I was actually in California during the '94 tournament, and remember some of the matches in those days. So my question had to do with the 1986 tournament, actually. So Tom mentioned thinking about the World Cups almost as events stacked on top of one another, and I was kind of curious about stretching the time back even further to '86 when U.S. Soccer placed a bid following Colombia's withdrawal. And I saw that you wrote a little bit about this in the first chapter of your book. And my sense was that there was a lot of acrimony after that bid failed. Did you get a sense that any of those old issues were still at play during the bid for the '94 tournament?
I think any doubts were sort of dismissed when they seen that the bid actually landed on the table. The amount of depth and knowledge that was put into the bid, rather than, like I said, in '86, there was pictures of, stadiums which still had gridiron markings on. Obviously for the likes of FIFA, to them, football is king. They don't want to see pictures of pitches, it's stadiums with the gridiron markings on. So I think when the bid came in front of FIFA, I think they sort of they looked at it and thought, this is completely different to the bid we got back in '86. It's, I think it was a case of they mean business this time, and it's quite interesting to think that obviously at the time USSF was a volunteer organization, and a lot of work needed doing behind the scenes to get the tournament up and running in the first place. But I think predominantly it was the depth and the knowledge that had been put into the actual bid that made FIFA think that this time, that they mean business.
I'm going to follow up with a kind of niche question, but as I read the book, continually bringing up the issue of climate, and how hot it was in those various heat waves across the continental United States in the summer of '94. Now we have a winter World Cup, because of the extreme heat, and then it's coming back, in 4 years, to a potentially another hot environment, right? How did you? Is that something that you weren't aware of in '94? That now with climate change, I'm just curious how you made that a theme throughout the course of the book, and how that impacted the football, and maybe what can FIFA and others do in order to, address that?
Well, I was aware of, the heat during the games when I was watching them back in '94. I remember the Ireland players with the white caps on during the national anthems, and Jack Charlton getting in trouble trying to get water onto the pitch and stuff. But I think it was important. It was important to mention it during the book, but I was sort of thinking I don't want to labour the point too much. But most players I spoke to all spoke about, oh, it was hot. Oh, it was so hot. You couldn't breathe on the pitch, and things like that. So I thought, it was a key part of the story. And when people talk about the final, it was dull, it was boring, it was Italy, Brazil, it should have been, a game for the ages. But I think it was the end of an energy sapping month. There was a lot of travel involved. Obviously the heat, it did have a huge part to play, and it had a huge effect on the final. It was just a shame that, they couldn't have extended the tournament by another 3 days, give the players a bit more time off, and we might have seen a different final altogether. But obviously there was a strict timeline. The players had to get back to the clubs for the beginning of their domestic season. So it's a shame that I think the standard of football in the final paid the price really for the heat. But yeah, it was something I didn't really want to labour on too much. But at the same time, I think it was a key part to the story. Even some of the African teams, even they were struggling. And it was a different type of heat. It was, they really struggled as well. So I think it did have a big part to play in the tournament. So I did have to keep sort of mentioning it throughout the book.
And it made me think that for the integrity of the competition, for the safety of the players, why don't you play it at the optimal time locally? I think the game can survive. The tournament can survive that. People are going to get up anyway. They're going to structure their watch parties, anyway. So maybe this is the time, this is the World Cup, that you don't necessarily cater to the European market and the European TV market. I mean, I'm not saying we have to answer that now. I'm just saying I think that should be a point of discussion. And your book just made me think about it in a new way. David has a question from upstate New York. Professor Kilpatrick.
Hey, yeah, thanks. And thanks, Matt, not only for the book, but for doing this today. You mentioned a few moments ago about how the bid for '94 showed a greater sense of professionalism than, say, '86, and there might have been some lessons learned. But in the decade before the World Cup launched, of course, soccer was enjoying a lot of media coverage, a lot of regular media attention, particularly in my home market of New York. And in '94, the sports pages were being very much dominated by the great run my beloved Rangers were making to finally lift the curse of my relative who burnt the Garden Elise and the cup. So that was nice to get that off the family's back. And of course, the Knicks are making a run that nearly made it. But then it seemed like we'd have a clear path to coverage for the beautiful game. And then all of a sudden, OJ. And I wondered if you could talk about then, as much as this was a resounding success, and I don't think anybody can really dispute that. And I would hope that when you read some of the material that was coming out in other countries, particularly the UK, prior to it, the kind of cynical dismissal of any interest here, I think we proved ourselves well. At least I believe we did. But in terms of media attention and the way to which it was competing with OJ coverage, and to what degree that was happening here in the States, and to what degree that may have been happening globally. I wondered if you could talk about that, because when most Americans think back on '94, I think probably the number one thing that we think about is OJ.
Yeah, well, I think over certainly on UK shores, from my own personal experience, seeing OJ in the newspapers and on TV, to me it was Nordberg out of the Naked Gun films. You know, I didn't know OJ Simpson as an athlete, as a college star, as a Heisman Trophy winner, as an NFL star. So I think to a lot of people on this side of the ocean, I think it was a case of not so much bemusement, but sort of like he wasn't a household name here. And again, I think that comes down to it's a pre-internet age. You know, it was the days before 24-hour news. You know, whereas if it was now, you know, if something like that was to happen now, it'd be a name of a star NBA player or an NFL player. People would know who he was now. Whereas here, people just knew him from the Naked Gun films. And there was even in my research, I found that there was journalists who were covering the tournament. They were saying like, "Who is he?" You know, there was US reporters were like, "Wow, OJ's gone on the run and this and that's happened." And there was like European-based journalists who were like, "Who is he?" "Oh, it's OJ Simpson." Show him a picture, and again, it's like, "Oh, the guy from the Naked Gun." It's like, no, he was, you know, he's a huge, you know, sports star. But you know, I think again, it comes down to, like I said, pre-internet age. It was harder, you know, to sort of cross over, if you like. And I said, from my own personal point of view, I didn't know him as a sports star. So I think from our side, from the UK side, I don't think it had that much of an impact on the coverage. But like I said, there was a definite sense of not so much that no one cared in this country, but because like England weren't in it, the media had to have a different angle, and their angle was, "Oh, the US don't know what they're doing. They're not a football country. They're going to split it into 4 quarters. They're going to be going to ad breaks every 5 minutes and showing vox pops of, you know, saying to people, 'Oh, you're going to watch the World Cup. Oh, what is it?' You know," and it was a bit of snobbery and sort of sneering cynicism from the press in this country, definitely. You know, the US are trying to you know, steal our game, you know, which is absolutely ridiculous. And when you see how the game's gone now, it's a truly global game. And like Tom touched on, the kickoff times and stuff, you know, it was all geared towards a European audience, because in FIFA's eyes, Europe was where football lived. That's, you know, where all the fans will be watching it from. You know, so we have to sort of pander to those. But you know, I said that those days are long gone now.
Yeah, and I think that OJ influenced the U.S. performance. You know, interviewing John Harkes, John and Tony Miola were roommates, and John is fixated on the OJ chase, and they have to get to bed because they play in the morning because of the European kickoff time. So I think it was like an 11 o'clock, you know, kickoff, and it was super hot. You know, Tab Ramos is saying it's like playing in a hothouse, you know, greenhouse, and it was just a, you know, miserable experience. So we have OJ, heat, the media, you know, all into one. But Peter, I know he was definitely around the '94 World Cup and involved, and then we'll go to Oswaldo after that.
Thank you, Tom. I was working for the Continental Indoor Soccer League at that point, and was fortunate enough to get tickets to several games in Chicago and Los Angeles. In Chicago, I was at the opener, the first game, and indeed watched the OJ chase afterwards at the Hilton Hotel at Kitty O'Shea's. And you know, during the game, I was with Pato Marhetic, the former Chicago Sting Argentine star. Remember him speaking several languages in the crowd to people around him and translating. In Los Angeles, I was at the Escobar match, sitting in a suite next to a boxer who I didn't know, but it turned out it was Oscar De La Hoya. And the anecdote I want to give, though, is one that I was not part of. It was secondhand, but is important to U.S. soccer's future history as a result of this World Cup. Phil Anschutz the man who, along with Lamar Hunt, single-handedly saved professional soccer in this country, attended his first pro soccer game at the Rose Bowl, Brazil, Italy. The first match was the final, and it was 0-0 after regulation. And Phil said to Bob Sanderman, who was with him, said, "It's 0-0, end of regulation, it's a tie, let's go home." Bob said, no, there's going to be extra time and then penalties if it's still tied. And Phil said, "No, we have a plane to catch." Bob said to Phil, "But it's your airplane. You can leave whenever you want." And Phil said, "No, I've seen enough. This is a great sport. Let's leave." So Phil Anschutz did not watch Brazil beat Italy in the final, but he did see enough to fall in love with the sport, or at least have enough faith in the sport to invest so many millions of dollars that allowed Major League Soccer to exist. And then my question for you, Matt, is what impact did soccer during the LA Olympics have on the '94 World Cup? I've heard that Alan's involvement on it was important, but did you dig into the LA Olympics and how that affected the '94 World Cup?
I think the key thing to the LA Olympics was how many people actually bought tickets to watch the football games. That is what really opened FIFA's eyes to the fact that, oh, hang on a minute, we have actually got an audience here. And speaking to Alan Rothenberg and Hank Steinbrecher, they said that huge grassroots soccer in the States, had to translate that into ticket sales. And I think when FIFA seen how many people were actually coming out to watch the games at the LA Olympics, that was when it was almost as if, a light bulb moment where they thought this could actually be done. And also the involvement between Alan Rothenberg, I think it was key for FIFA to get him involved in the organising it, because they'd seen they'd seen him at first hand how good he was at putting the football on during the LA Olympics. So yeah, I think the key thing is ticket sales, getting people into the stadiums, seeing full stadiums in the US for football games. I think to FIFA that was a huge shock. It's sort of like similar now when the NFL games come to the UK, seeing the NFL seeing full, Wembley Stadium full. Oh, we thought it'd be half. No, there's a huge market for for people to come and watch games. So yeah, it's basically all come down to that. People coming out of their houses, buying tickets, watching the games.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
And before we go to Oswaldo, I've noticed this NFL phenomenon on the tube, the underground. I'll be coming back from a soccer match, and you'll see everyone in there, whether Green Bay Packers or New York Football Giants, and I'm assuming they're American, and I'll engage them, and they're from Germany, they're from Sweden, or they're here from England. So I mean, they definitely have an international following in London. Being a crossroads of sorts, people are coming from across Europe to go to those gridiron matches. Oswaldo.
Yes. Before my question, let me just say that you guys make me feel very old, because the first World Cup I remember is 1958 Sweden, and the first one I watched on TV was 66 England. So anyway, let's go to the question. One of the things that really makes me kind of mad these days is talking about Qatar and everybody, or the issue being mentioned repeatedly is that this is going to be a great World Cup because the stadiums are all there. The two most distant one are 18 kilometers away, and all the fans will be in one place. So I haven't read the book, and so I don't know whether this issue is addressed in the book. But the US '94 was the first time in which a World Cup was played over 4 hours time zone. That had never happened before. And I doubt that in Russia was the same, because I think the two furthest city were Leningrad and Yekaterinburg, and I don't think they are more than an hour away, a zone, our time zone away. So since you interviewed a lot of players, how was this issue of having to transfer for games, not only north south, which obviously had happened in other countries that held the World Cup, but also east-west affected? Because I have the feeling that this idea that you don't have to move is overplayed in the wild attempt that Qatar is doing to justify its selection. Was that an issue? And if so, in which way?
I think as the tournament progressed, I think the traveling did start to take its toll on the players. I think early on, though, there's probably just a sense of excitement. We're at the World Cup, we're on a private jet with all our teammates. We're flying off to play in a packed stadium, in front of a global audience. But I know that for the likes of the third, fourth place playoff, I think Bulgaria had to travel like 3,000 miles to play their game. And I think by the time they got there, it was just like, we just want to, we've had enough now. We just want to go home. So I think as the tournament progressed, I think it did sort of take its toll on players. I think now you look back at, like conditioning of players. In club football, managers don't like the players living too far away from training grounds because they don't like them traveling. It can put strain on muscles and it can contribute to injuries and stuff. But I think back then, it wasn't so big a thing. But I think with it being such a new thing for players, they weren't used to doing that much traveling. I don't think they don't think it affected them that much. It's certainly early on in the tournament. But I think for teams that got through to the latter stages, I think certainly, like I said, certainly Bulgaria, when they got to the third, fourth place playoff, they were ready just to go 3,000 miles the other way and go home. So yeah, I think the traveling and as we touched on before, the heat and the temperatures, I think they were two huge factors. How much impact they had, I don't think we could say for definite, but I'm sure it did have a huge part to play, maybe as much as a part as the heat did.
We're going to pass the microphone to Derek Lechty. You're going to have to unmute yourself. And Derek is coming from California, been involved in soccer for many decades out that way.
Thank you very much, Matt. First of all, where can we get your book?
It's available. I'm not sure if it's available in the States just yet. I think it's available next month. I think 15th of December, you'll be able to get it like Barnes and Noble, Amazon, things like that. You can get it on Kindle. You can get an ebook version of it. But I spoke to my publisher about getting it released a bit earlier in the States ahead of the World Cup. But I think with the way the world is at the moment, with getting things shipped over to certain places and things, it's taking a bit longer than usual. So I think it's going to be available in shops in the States. I think it's 15th of December. But like I said, you can get an ebook version of it through Pitch Publishing's website. They've got some links on there.
Thank you very much for making this effort, because for me personally, the World Cup was the fulfillment of a dream which started with me when I was a teenager in Santa Barbara, California, playing soccer in high school. And so I've had the privilege of being able to be involved with 6 World Cups. And although after 1982, frankly, I gave up because I felt the game was going downhill. But in any case, I wonder if your book has any emphasis on the labor of love that this was for soccer volunteers who worked on the World Cup. We started our effort here in San Francisco. I was the executive director of what was called the San Francisco Bay Task Force 94, which actually was the bid committee for the games at Stanford. And it took 5 years until we finally saw the final results of all our work. And so not to say that we didn't think it was worth it, it certainly was, because not only after we were the bid committee, we became the host committee, and then we became the legacy committee. And I'm not sure how many venues actually had a legacy committee. We were supposed to get $1 million from the organization to promote soccer for underprivileged youth in the San Francisco Bay Area as a result of our efforts in putting on the games at Stanford. Unfortunately, Mr. Havilangi came to visit the stadium at Stanford and said, oh no, this has to be done. So we got reduced to $500,000. But in any case, that $500,000 was dispersed over time to kids and underprivileged kids in the Bay Area for the development of soccer. Full circle with all of this. And again, you are memorializing this tremendous event, which was an incredible success for the United States. It was the most financially successful World Cup at that time in history, and speaks well for the fact that we will have and do have and will continue to have first-class soccer here in America. Thank you very much.
Welcome. Yeah, I think that when I first started looking into the structure of the book, I was quite sort of adamant that I didn't just want to do a day-by-day account. I wanted to look at the World Cup as a whole, from the World Cup being put on to it being, from the World Cup being the bid being put together, the bid being accepted, and the World Cup being put on before the games had even kicked off. And speaking to the likes of Jim Trecker and Tom Meredith, you sort of realise what a huge part the volunteers had to play in getting the bid on the table, getting the bid accepted. And personally, the whole story from the bid process through to the tournament being put on, I think you could probably write a book just about that, just about that part of the story. And people have said to me, oh, it's interesting to read the early parts of how the World Cup was put on and the bid. And I thought, well, it's such a key part of the story to me, that there was a group of volunteers who were willing to, put all their efforts, all their energy and all their spare time into getting this World Cup on. And like I said, to look at what the World Cup is now, the amount of people that must be involved now in getting a World Cup on, top, companies that are involved in producing World Cups now. Whereas back then it was, a gang of volunteers whose passion and love for the game, that's what basically won the US the rights to host a World Cup.
Thank you for that. You mentioned pitch publishing. I know there's at least one other person on the call who's had experience working with the folks at pitch publishing. I'm holding another World Cup, book that I'm sure you're familiar with. This is 82, 94. So it's an interesting way to look at, soccer history through the lens of a tournament. Could you tell us a little bit, maybe nuts and bolts of that experience? Because I know there are some prospective authors here, whether they go the pitch publishing route or another route. Maybe just some reflections on that process, because a lot of the times that doesn't get talked about, and it's such an important part of it.
Yeah, I'd read quite a few books that pitch publishing had released, and when I came to do the book, I sort of pinpointed them as a publisher that I thought would go for my idea. That they'd published similar sort of titles before. So I basically went on the website, looked at how to submit a pitch to them. It took probably took about 2 or 3 weeks to get it all down, and you had to do your chapter breakdowns. You had to put, even reasons why you wanted to write the book, which I think is important, because like I've said before, you've got to be passionate about the subject. You can't just, I'll write a book about that, do a bit of research and write it, because I think that'll come across on the pages if you're not sort of passionate about it. So yeah, put the submission together. It took about 3 weeks, and then it was a matter of days before I got a reply saying, "Yeah, brilliant, go for it. Will you be speaking to? Will you be getting new information? Will you be speaking to people that were involved in the World Cup?" And at this point, I had no one lined up. I had no interviewers lined up, and I just said, "Oh yeah, I'll be speaking to people." Sort of like fingers crossed that I will be able to. And then yeah, I was just sort of left alone then to write. Checked in every now and again. Sent some pictures in to a cover designer and sort of like an idea of what I wanted the cover to look like. But yeah, generally from that moment on was just left alone. I had the submission deadline, and yeah, I was just sort of left alone to write really, which was good. You know, you didn't have anyone sort of breathing down your neck saying how you getting on, how many pages have you wrote, or we want to see this, we want to see chapters and things. It was just sort of, you know, they put faith in me to just crack on and write it. So yeah, it was an enjoyable and very surreal experience. Like I said, speaking to some of the people I spoke to in regards to interviews and stuff, it was yeah, it's a pretty surreal experience when I'm saying to my wife, "Oh, can you just turn the TV down? I'm just going to speak to Thomas Ravelli. You know, can you tell the kids not to come upstairs because I'm on a call with Brian Roy?" You know, things like that. It's just when you look back now, it's just bizarre. You know, to think that I got to speak to these guys. But yeah, from the writing side of things and dealing with the publishers, it was yeah, it was pretty seamless. All I'd say is if you're put a submission into any publishers, really sort of sell yourself, you know, sell your writing experience, sell your passion. You know, you really got to put across why you want to write this book and why it's going to be worth reading.
Great advice there. I know a lot of the times we have these questions and we just don't ask that. So great to get your experience. We're coming up on the hour mark. And you know, we've promised folks in and out of your lunch hour. Do we have any other questions? You can chime in at this point. If you've been dying to ask a question, please do so now. Check the chat here. I don't see anything there. I am all out of questions, so if anyone else wants to join in, well, the obvious kind of conclusion question is, were you able to justify your subtitle? I mean, is it really the World Cup that changed the game? Maybe in summation, you know, make a case how. Well, your book makes the case, right? But you know, how would you sum that up? You know, especially for people who don't have access to the book yet.
Like I sort of alluded to before, for me, it was the World Cup that it was the beginning of football today as we know it. It was the true beginning of the true global game of the, you know, before that World Cup. You know players through, you know, I know players through my sticker albums and things like that. You wouldn't get to see players on a, you know, on a daily or weekly basis. And I think that was the last World Cup where that happened. I think from like France '98 onwards, it truly was a global game. It was Champions League, the likes of the FIFA computer games. Like I said, my kids play those games now, and they know. You know, I could ask my kids who plays left back for Atletico Madrid, and they'd be able to tell me like that. You know, it was the beginning of the globalization of the game, the commercialization of the game. You know, I spoke to some people and I said, well, it's not necessarily been changed in you know, for the better. Some people would argue it's worse with the, like I said, the amount of money that sloshes around in the game now. But for me, it was the birthplace of modern football. For me, USA '94, it's shown, like I said, it's shown FIFA how World Cup could be put on, how they can make a ton of money out of World Cups. But if you look at each country, it changed. I think it changed the game in the States. I think if USA 94 hadn't have been a success, if the national team would have just crashed and burnt in the group stages, maybe that would have had a knock-on effect in the interest in the game. Obviously with the MLS starting in 96. So I think, if you look at it, not just as a whole, if you look at how it affected, each country as well, I think, you could say that, especially for the States, I think it changed the game in your country. And obviously we'll see in 2026, it will be a completely different spectacle to 94. But I think without 94, there might not be a tournament in 2026.
Wonderful. Well, on behalf of the society, I want to thank Matthew Evans for joining us, the author of the recent book US 94. Let me get that again. The World Cup That Changed the Game. It will be out December 15th in the United States. You can get an ebook through the Pitch Publishing website. So make sure you get it. Great contribution to a World Cup that we all hold near and dear to our hearts. And I saw in the chat room someone making fun of one of my trinkets. It is my cherished belt buckle. I'm going to try to get a leather belt attached to it in the coming week, and I'll wear it in North Wales, where Matthew is from. We're going to be on a panel together on American soccer culture. So I will be able to thank him in person and buy him a pint on the society to thank him for joining us today. So great seeing everybody. The next time that we'll meet as a society will be after the first round of games. So we will play Matt's native Welsh team. We will play the country that shall not be named. And then following that, we will play Iran in the last of the group games. So hopefully as a society, we'll be able to celebrate passage into the second round. But thanks to everybody. Enjoy the rest of the day, the weekend, and we'll have a World Cup to talk about soon enough. But we enjoyed our time talking about the 94 World Cup. So go out and get the book, and thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks, guys.